Super excited to have Darren Peterson. Darren and I work together at a company called SkyKick up here in Seattle. And his talk is about how starting small with AI benefits both customers and the product team. Welcome, Darren. And this is the mission of Agile Austin.
Glad to be here.
What's that, Darren?
Glad to be here.
Yeah. And you're in Seattle as well today, right, Darren?
I am. Yep.
Excellent. Just across the lake from me.
Mhm.
Agile Velocity and Admalura Coaching. We have many sponsorship opportunities and membership opportunities. Please reach out to a board member. We happen to have at least one right now with Ben Rogers, who's our CTO. These are the various special interest groups that we have, and you'll see in the lower right-hand corner, the newest one is Product and AI SIG. And we actually have the leader of the book club here, Ned Horvath, if you're interested in that. We have many other sponsors. I think this might actually be for the conference, so I should probably get rid of this slide. I won't go too much into both Vishal and I, but we've been active in Agile Austin community since 2007. Basically, our idea is to focus on this intersection of what's happening with product and then AI and Agile, and talk about problems and benefits and all the people that are changing along the way. We'd love to have folks like you that are in this meeting today speak at one of our upcoming events. Speaking of upcoming events, John Hines will be with us next month. This is a cool talk. How does this data make me feel? Usability in AI, psychology matters. That is a fun talk. He gave this at some AI meetups a few months ago. So it's a different perspective on AI. Vishal and I are going to do a experiment, which lightning round presentations, questions and answers, more on that later, but it's going to be a bit of a free-for-all. We think that August might be a lot of people on summer vacation, so we just decided to make it a bit more open structure for those who want to join. Note that it'll be on not the last Friday of the month. It'll be on the third to last Friday, I guess, August 23rd. We moved that because there's a holiday there in the United States. And it's running September 27th. We're open for additional folks. So here's what Darren's going to be talking about. You all can read it, but what's exciting about this is Darren's going to talk through, how he and his team, which I'm part of, decided to use AI from the very beginning when he was considering doing this from a product perspective, and then how that kind of some experimentation and learning, failure and success along the way. So pretty excited to have Darren here as a hands-on practitioner, senior product leader. Speaking of Darren, he's the head of cloud management products at SkyKick, where I work as well. He's been in Microsoft and many other kinds of companies. You were at Microsoft, right, Darren?
I was not actually. I'm one of the few.
One of the few. Okay, many people where we work were at Microsoft, but has worked in lots of enterprise software development, product marketing, product management, enterprise B2B software. There's his profile, and I'm sure Darren will do a great job introducing himself too and giving a little bit of background. But please feel free to reach out to Vishal or I if you have any questions. And the final thing that I usually say is that we have a Slack community, and you can join that Slack community, the Agile Austin and the Product and AI SIG Slack community, without being a member of Agile Austin. So just reach out to either of us if you're interested. And you have posts and updates and some discussions that take place there. So with that, Darren, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to, let's see if I can turn this over to you somehow.
How about now?
Looks great.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks, Matt, for the invitation. Your group sounds awesome, actually. I'm not sure that there's an equivalent here in Seattle. There should be, but it's warmer where you are, so I actually feel nice and cozy. Vishal's actually making me feel like I'm on the beach, but it's kind of cold, unfortunately, up here in Seattle, and so that's why I'm doing the long sleeves. But anyway, thanks for the invitation. As Matt mentioned, I run product management for the cloud management products that SkyKick has. SkyKick as a company focuses on Microsoft 365 ISPs, and so, or ITSPs that focus on supporting small to medium-sized businesses. And so as those IT service providers support the IT of, small, ranging from, bakeries to small manufacturing companies, small to medium-sized manufacturing companies and such. They have a real tough job to do, and SkyKick is here to make their jobs easier. In fact, our products really focus on getting people to the cloud, or getting the sort of Microsoft, if you want to think of Exchange, getting Exchange into the cloud. One of the biggest things that surprisingly is still on-prem in a lot of cases, backing up that data that's in the cloud. And then, of course, my product team is focused on managing that tenant, either from like a help desk perspective or with a real key focus on security. And it's really that idea of security that led us to start looking at AI. And so I'm going to talk a little bit. This story is going to start on kind of the point at which we started taking AI seriously, and kind of some of the things that led to that. We're going to talk about some of the ideas that we were putting together as it related to how AI might be meaningful to our customers. And again, we're talking about IT administrators, security administrators, how AI might be able to help them do their job. And some of the choices that we made going through the process, and that sort of thing. But I think to understand what our value proposition coming into the equation looks like, we're going to just give you a little sense of what our security suite is about, because I think that context is going to come in handy. And so we tend to think of sort of finding problems and fixing problems as it relates to security. And we think of it in terms of being proactive and reactive, right? Those four dimensions really sort of encompass the nature of the products that we build. Navigator is really about keeping tabs on a tenant, analyzing a tenant, seeing how it sits as it relates to the security that should be there, should be in place. And of course, every client is different. Like a bakery, I use it for example, they're not really super concerned about a lot of data. It's not really a data business, right? And so security is not the biggest deal to them, unless of course ransomware comes along and freezes their ability to do business. And then, of course, we have lots of other companies that would have much more interest in security, have a lot more digital assets that they're trying to protect in the cloud. And so the Navigator is really focused on understanding what the state of a Microsoft tenant looks like, and then trying to come up with ways to protect it and remediate issues that you find. On the right-hand side is really the manager part of this. So in other words, when I do find a problem, I have to fix the problem. And so the manager side of this equation is really about making changes to the tenant. And in an MSP world, we're talking about not just an IT team like at SkyKick, where all they really care about is the employees at the company and the systems they manage. For an MSP, we're thinking in terms of multiple tenants. I have 20 or 50 thousands of customers, and I'm trying to caretake all of those tenants at once. And so a lot of the visibility that I need is cross-tenant, as well as the taking actions, right? Because I would love to be able to keep my team sane, to be able to know that if I'm going to create a security policy or something, they would call it a conditional access policy, that determines sort of how people get prompted to log in as they try and get access to the tenant or their email and such, that I might want to have a lot of the companies that I'm managing use the same policy, right? So that I'm not going crazy trying to figure out, well, how is this different, and how does that impact the relative security? Or if there's a problem, do I kind of know what I'm dealing with, or do I have to spend a bunch of time researching to figure out how did we set this thing up, and those sort of things, because you lose a lot of time. And obviously, particularly if a business is being hampered in terms of being able to run because of a security issue, speed is obviously an issue. So in any case, those kinds of problems are what we're dealing with. And so when we think in terms of AI, we really have been watching the sort of I mean, AI has been around forever. I mean, we've watched all the way back to, chess players and such, but, it really started opening up for us, probably like for you guys, where ChatGPT, I can go play with it. Okay. I don't know that I was seeking out necessarily, except as a curiosity, the idea of utilizing AI in my product suite, and I'm sure you were similar. And then when all of a sudden people started getting their hands on AI, that's all of a sudden where it looks like everybody's looking at me. What are we going to do with regard to AI? How is that going to impact our products? How are we going to factor that into our business model and obviously our products? And so each of these different events, I put a lot of these up here from the different vendors that are out there that are providing either innovation or technology solutions, because you all probably are on different stacks. And we just happen to be in the Azure stack, not surprisingly, given our focus. And so that anything that's standing out along here as it relates to what we could use really happened here in the spring, late winter, early spring of 23, when obviously not only ChatGPT's on, coming out, but also the technology underneath ChatGPT, as we learned, was actually Microsoft. And so, of course, Microsoft starts announcing the fact that the OpenAI services, and there have definitely been, like, if you're familiar with Power Virtual Agents, if you have in your own products have been thinking about how do I integrate the various cloud-related services, because they've certainly made them very accessible to product planners and obviously product engineers. But in terms of readiness to factor into your product, I mean, it's right about there where really it got to be somewhat real. And my team started asking the question, okay, we need to get a plan, because as I said, all eyes are looking at us saying, how are you going to factor AI into our products? And again, you put two and two together. I'm a support desk for IT stuff. I'm taking calls, either reacting to problems or even just onboarding new employees. And the question is like, hey, could AI do that? I mean, that was just a natural question we were getting, is like, could you take the first tier of the help desk, effectively take some of the stuff off their table? I need to reset my password. Well, why do I have to have a person involved in that equation? I mean, that was like an obvious and a realistic question. And so, of course, when the OpenAI services started to come about, and as they continue to grow from the Power Virtual Agents capabilities within Azure. And sorry if I'm using an example that you're not familiar with, but I'm sure in these different platforms, if you're used to Amazon or you're used to some of these others, there's probably the equivalents of these tools that you could be using, that they've made them really accessible to us. And if we can build it into the product, we effectively can use on demand, right? Or have it the cost of goods on that be fairly small in the early days, because it's consumption based. And so it's like, it doesn't really hurt to try if we can find a good way to utilize it. And so ultimately, we our attention is grabbed, and we start thinking about what we could do, and our path ultimately, again, the ideation about AI and what it could do to a roadmap is back in last February, really, or I guess a couple of Februaries ago. But the R&D efforts really kicked off around April, and that came from a workshop. And as Matt was saying, I happen to be here in the Seattle area. Our company is as well. And I'm closer to Microsoft than I am to my office. And so when Microsoft says, hey, we'd like to invite you guys over to dig in on AI, and because we're such a close partner with them, we had the opportunity to go sit in a room for a whole day and get educated on this technology. And I would say we probably had 30 people, 25 people, from our product management team to our engineering team to our IT team. They were like, hey, we want to go. And some of us went in person, some of us did it online, but it was a really great immersion for a day to figure out, like, what's the state of the tech? Is it ready for a vendor like us to start integrating into our product? And of course, we walked away with a lot of ideas from that session. And of course, because the session was somewhat tailored to just a small number of vendors, we were able to explore ideas that had some meaning to us. But ultimately, it was like, okay, guys, now we went to that session. Let's get in a room. And let's talk about what we saw and what we think is vaporware, what's real, what scenarios we be able to figure out. And ultimately, we came away with 3 ideas that we thought were really legitimate, actual contenders. And in fact, we decided to break into small teams. We decided to just organize ourselves around carving enough time out of the day. I don't know if you guys do this with hackathons and so on. We do that sometimes too. But in this particular case, we had a number of teams that said, look, why don't we do this? Why don't we carve off either half a day or all day on Fridays where they get to work on this, okay? And in these little teams, they would just get on a Teams meeting for the whole afternoon and just bang on stuff and try stuff. And, we'd given them a little bit of guidance on things we might be able to poke at, to give them just a little bit of direction. But ultimately, if they came up with something better or something cooler, then, that would be fine too. But that's kind of how we wanted to engender that creativity and build it, into ideas that we could maybe put into action. I will say that one of my colleagues, and I may depend, I'm going to circle back near the end here and see if there's any more technical kinds of questions, because I'm going to assume that the kinds of questions you might have might be about the technologies and the pluses and minuses of some of the things we tried. John Dennis is on the call, or JD is what he goes by. He was, in the middle of a lot of this. He's on the call, and we'll circle back around, and if he has comments or questions here on the technical side. But I'm just going to scooch ahead and say these are the three ideas. Number one is the obvious one. What about a chatbot? Right, the whole idea of the first tier help desk, right? Can we push some tasks down to tier 0 and allow effectively an employee to be able to self-serve for some of the things that, for all intents and purposes, are mundane, routine, easy to do, and with AI support we could do. Of course, we had our eyes a little further upstream into, frankly, into like the tier 2, tier 3 category, right? Particularly when you're dealing with security issues. Your team, particularly in the MSP world, is that you're not stock full of security experts, right? These are small companies, these IT service providers themselves, a lot of times less than 30 or even less than 20 people. And so if they've got one, maybe two people that really know a lot about IT security, then that they're lucky. And so the point there being is, like, how do we actually take the knowledge that they have and spread it around the rest of their team, at least as it relates to certain use cases? And so our vision of what we could use a chatbot for was not just in the hands of the employee, but also in the hands of the technicians to assist them in the process. And in fact, our product, Security Manager, is really kind of designed to kind of do just that. And so, of course, it seemed like it was a great companion potentially for the existing value prop that we had. But that was kind of shooting for the moon, to be honest, right? We understood that was going to be a real tough one to build. But I bring up JD's name because he was actually a guy that at a hackathon 4 years ago, I think, effectively built a chatbot that was based on our system's back end that could allow someone to interact and basically have it, let's say, create a new user account and assign this license to them, and give them access to these groups and the kinds of things you could see a help desk do. JD in particular was excited to see, hey, with this new tech, could we make that thing a reality? And so in any case, like, obviously that drove that. But we had a couple of other ideas, and the nature of our product is such that we try and pull together information about security that our user can hand to their customer. Right. Again, we're talking about small to medium-sized businesses. Many of them are like owner-led companies, and the person you're talking to is the owner of the business, who is definitely not technical. And so the question is, how do you give a face to IT security? How do you communicate information about IT security in a way that they can grok, that they can understand, they can appreciate? Because it's a really tough topic to say, you should pay me more money to do more security. And they're like, well, how much do I need? I thought I was already paying you for that. Okay, and so giving security a face is something that our partners, these MSPs, are very interested in. And so the idea of having an AI-driven news curation service that effectively would put a set of news articles that are specific to the company and the industry they're in, because stuff's happening all the time all around the world. And so if you're going to give me news articles on IT security, the best ones you can give me are the ones that happen in Redmond, Washington. And that if I'm in, this particular industry that happen to companies like mine, because if you can narrow down the list of all the possible things I could read, these would actually be meaningful to us. And so we asked ourselves, could we actually use AI to drive a news curation service as part of our back end to drive the kinds of news articles that our product would effectively share with the customer? And then, of course, in order to give that news meaning, I have to know what industry the company's in. If you've ever had an application where you're like, oh, how do I get, think of if you have a CRM application, right? Part of the metadata about a company record or account record is, where are they? How many employees do they have, or whatever, and what industry are they in? And so typically, if you're going to have an application like that, CRM or otherwise, and you need to get the answer to what industry is this company in, typically you knock on the door of Dun and Bradstreet's, right? Because you can go license the Hoover's service in order to actually answer the question of what industry is this company in and know you're getting a good answer. Now, Hoover's has been around forever, and it's also pretty expensive. And so for us as a small to medium sized technology company, we wouldn't go into that purchase that cost of goods sold in our product easily, right? Because we have a lot of stuff we have to pay attention to. So the question on our minds as we put these ideas out there is like, the internet knows what industry everybody's company's in. In fact, it's probably on their website. And so the question came up as one of the ideas: could we just basically use ChatGPT to answer the question of what industry is this company in? And effectively, that was our third idea. Okay, so Matt, I don't know if we pause for questions every now and then, or whether I should just keep barreling through and save them to the end. What do we typically like to do?
Maybe, I mean, it might be a good time to pause if there are any questions. I don't see any hands up right now. So
Awesome.
and
Well,
sometimes there's chat too, and folks can drop questions in the chat, and the moderators will look for chat questions.
awesome. All right, cool. So first use case, not a surprising one to us all, right? The chatbot. So we'd gone to the process of saying, okay, what would a chatbot be like? Who is the user? We had sort of, there's a lot more detailed information here technically, but just from a user experience standpoint, we're like, okay, what I want to do is imagine that, again, persona 1, the end user customer; persona 2, the help desk technician that they're going to call to try and get help; persona number 3, the person who actually has the answer to that question, right? And those being the potential sort of users or even contributors to the knowledge that this chatbot would be based upon, the rules and logic or whatever they'd be based on. If you've ever created one, a lot of times they start off with like a branching type of logic tree to find, to be able to query and get the right question, to pull the right question out of the user. Once you get the right question, here's the list of answers. Is this the right one? That sort of thing. So, we'd put together a concept of what we would like it to do and how it would actually integrate into our product. And we thought, well, we could just basically have this Ask Copilot hovering right within the application, because we actually already have a button in the application that just says help. And so, you guys probably have something similar in your product. It's just like, well, an easy access, I need help, great. Here's the kind of help I can offer you, right? And obviously paths into the help center, the documentation and that sort of thing. But in this particular case, it'd be like, you can also ask me, right? Effectively, this little guy Skylar was our how we envisioned it. So in any case, we started off with like just the concept of the idea and handed that to the team that was going to poke at it for a while. And we gave them some, use cases. So we said, okay, here's a use case. If you could get that to work, that would be really interesting to the product, right? And so we created a list of use cases that would be what we'd try and get the thing to do. And then effectively, outlined like the building blocks of it. So we'd obviously need a chat interface. And the question is, where do you get that from? It needs to be able to run inside our Angular app. We could build one, we could go license one. There's a lot of ways to build them. And you also have to take into account is when we're having this conversation, because if you're paying attention to AI, you realize a lot of this stuff is now becoming just off the shelf. But like, a year and a half ago, that wasn't true as we started down this path. And so, we're asking ourselves, are we going to have to build this or what have you? And I'm going to talk about that journey a little bit in terms of the different technologies and how over time it was influencing our decisions on what to do and, what was viable. We were talking about the LLM capabilities. So in our particular case, we're like, this needs to be aware of who's asking the question and the tenant that they're asking it about. Again, if I am an MSP or an IT service provider and I have 100 customers, which customer is this? And which tenant belongs to this customer? Because the question that they're asking may be able to be answered by regular internet information. Microsoft has tons and tons of great documentation about IT security as it relates to Exchange, as it relates to SharePoint or Teams. What about like what's actually going on in their tenant? And that would actually have to factor into this if we were doing it right. So all subscribers across all tenants, all users within a tenant, and then some users within a tenant in terms of the information that would be available to them. Now we ought to also ask the question of, is the person asking the question entitled to the answer, right? And so the permissions on the content That was obviously a big deal at the time as well. This stuff has matured a ton since at this point, but at the time, we weren't really sure how we were going to do it. And then, of course, in our world, we're combining both structured and unstructured data. There's tons and tons of documents. I mentioned some, our documentation, Microsoft's documentation, general documentation about security. And then there's a bunch of structured data, like what's going on inside of a tenant that would be meaningful, and trying to figure out how do we blend all of that information together. And then, of course, a lot of things are not just a reset my password type of thing, right? There's actually a set of steps that you'd have to follow. So not only would we have to be able to answer like a one-click type of question, but we might have to come up with actually it's going to take 5 steps, right? And you may have to remediate something, understand what's going on, answer a couple of questions based on that, take these other 3 steps. And so knowing that our solution would have to be that sophisticated. Needless to say, we're walking way away in terms of the bar being so high in order for this to really work, for being viable. And in fact, as much as we tried with different technologies, and these are some of them, we're still working on it. And I'll talk a little bit about the outcome there. But at the beginning, it was using ChatGPT via Azure. I've talked a little bit about that. I'll pause on this slide. This is the one if we want to come back, we can have JD talk about, because he had his hands on all of this tech, and ultimately was the guy that was making the thumbs up, thumbs down on these technologies. And so if you do have questions about this, we'll save them and come back at the end. That way he has a chance to answer those. But after several iterations, we moved sort of from the left side of this, lots of this stuff in the middle, and have more or less landed on these technologies, so LangChain, LangGraph, and Chainlit. And I'm guessing many of you have a similar story, and maybe you're using some of these technologies and finding your way to the technologies on the right. But obviously, there's a lot of other choices out there. But ultimately, when we stood them up against each other and we looked at the various solutions, it also turned out that those technologies didn't fit each solution the same way, naturally, right? Because if we're talking about the idea of being able to do a help desk agent, this more looked like the kind of technology we would have to put together, right? Thinking about indexing documents, having a vector database, and obviously user query, the ability to sort of, as I said, sort of guide, the process to getting to the right kind of answer from the LLM. Then obviously, ideally, figuring out whether you got it right and feeding that back in. The embedded search agent would be, a little bit different here. And then, of course, these orchestrated agents, and we had a couple examples of those where we're really trying to say, we could utilize these technologies to solve each of the different use cases. And ultimately, for this first one, as I said, we're still working on it. I mean, I think the R&D quickly yielded something basic, and in fact, as a how should I put it, enthusiastic technician, pseudo technician on my part, I was really anxious to have something on the scoreboard, and maybe some of this happened to some of you. I got a little too many other people, stakeholders. Thankfully, I only did it inside the company, excited about what we were working on and the potential that we could actually ship something. Yeah, I had to eat crow a little bit because we just couldn't get there with this because it just was too ambitious. And as I say, thankfully, I limited that exposure to internal stakeholders, but at least they're glad we're working on it, right? It shows obviously we care, and and we're pushing the limits here of what can be done. Ultimately, though, use case number 2 and 3, we actually shipped them. They're in the product today. So what are these? I mentioned them to you before. Our business justification, key to these, right? I think that the chatbot thing I gave you through my storytelling, a little bit about the business justification, offsetting help desk. But in this particular case, it was a little bit different, right? We're really focused on improving the relevance of the news. This is a screenshot of a report, a customer-facing report. Again, that persona, that's the business owner that doesn't know anything about technology, but needs to appreciate the fact that they need to know enough to make risk reward decisions and help the IT service provider decide how much to tighten the screws as it relates to the security of their content and their applications. And so ultimately, this news list here, whenever our partner runs a report, the MSP runs a report for their customer, the system already knows who the customer is, what industry they're in, where they are, and then ultimately curates the list of news to make it more relevant. If the customer is in Sydney, they're going to see articles about companies in their industry that ideally are in Australia. obviously different in Europe and so on and so forth. And this is important too in our world because we have a lot of different industry standards as it relates to IT security. And if you're in Australia, you want to hear about the Essential 8 framework about IT security. No one else in the world cares about that, but you do, right? And then people in Australia may not want to hear about, let's say, ones that are being adopted in Europe. The requirements of this, obviously, the cost of goods sold had to be really low. I mean, I'm not making money on this particular report, not this page of this report. It's compelling. It really is differentiating, but I can't really offset it with any type of new, uplift in the price of this thing. And ultimately, it was inexpensive. It was something we could build on top of Bing. Bing has an API, news API that was actually free for us to use. Naturally, we're with these links, send them back to Bing, so we're driving traffic to Bing for those that want to consume this information. And as I said, it's very differentiating. There aren't a lot of people in our industry that have figured out how to do this, thankfully. And so it's been a great value proposition for us. And then this one obviously is important because number one, it is actually impacting our cost of goods sold. We may or may not have even invested in the ability to do this if we weren't able to figure out how to do it with AI. And so and frankly, like the way that Hoover's and Dun& Bradstreet licenses this information, it's just not really suitable for this use case. I mean, there are a lot of cases like I run a business. My sellers have to know who they're selling to, and we're going to make money on the fact that they do, and so they'll invest in this as a resource. In this particular case, it'd be hard to say that there's a clear line of revenue that would offset the cost of this. So we had to find some way to do it inexpensively, but of course it must be accurate. Yeah, I do not want to send a report about your industry when I got your industry wrong. Okay, and so it was really important that it was right. And so we used the Microsoft 365 tenant data, and fortunately for us, Microsoft knows obviously the company, their billing address for their main billing address. They know what the domain of their website is. That's intrinsic to the actual tenant. Knows what their internet domain is. So I can basically tell the AI, look at that website, mine that for all the information that you can, and see if you can figure out what industry they're in. And the trick really was, can I figure out how to narrow it down given this tree, right? Because the way that we used NAICS as a encoding system, not because the codes themselves matter, but because it's a very thorough list of industry classification codes that has a tree that says the more characters, the more specific the industry name itself is. And so effectively, we're able to use this to say, give me the most accurate industry name. And if there was one that was more specific, we would want, in a list of 5 potential ones, pick the most specific one, because obviously that's going to aid that AI service that's going and looking up news. And ultimately, this, as I said, it took a number of iterations to get this right. Lots and lots of practice, lots of use cases. I mean, from a product perspective, we had to document a ton of, okay, if it's really working, it would get the answer to this, it would know the industry of these companies, right? And so we did hundreds and hundreds of them, made sure that we actually got the right ones, and made sure that we did good testing to ensure that this actually was right. And ultimately, what it's able to do, besides the news, it's even doing things like, if you're familiar with something called the Microsoft Secure Score, it's Microsoft's point of view in regard to, is your tenant secure? And it's a scoring system where the number itself, in this case 91, tells you what your score is. The 282 tells you what your score could be, right? Out of what? 91 out of what? And both of those numbers can change. But ultimately, most people want to know, okay, I get where, yeah, that's perfect. No one's perfect. What I want to know is, how am I and how is my score relative to my competitors? That's the question everyone wants the answer to. And so there you go, right? So effectively, we're saying this is the industry average score for companies in your industry and your geography, obviously, and you're below it. And that actually is meaningful to the partner because they can say, look, you should be doing better. Or if you are doing better, if the score, let's say, is flipped, where you're 133 and the industry average is 91, look, all right, a great job I'm doing, is what the partner basically gets to say to the customer. And of course, if I want to act on that, I do want to improve my score. The question is, how do I do it? Well, this particular report tells you some of the things you would do, but in order to do them, They wanted to know, what licenses do you need? Because Microsoft has a little bit of a, yeah, they have a, the oar in the water on this, right? In other words, the higher your score means the more stuff you bought, not surprisingly, right? And the higher score you can get also reflects the stuff you bought. So effectively, what licenses would I want to have if I were to get a score of 133? Well, go look at the companies that have this 133 scores. Tell me what percentage of them use these other products. And now that also helps the partner and the customer have a conversation about, how should we be licensed? So I'm giving you these examples. I assume that you guys may not be familiar with this industry, and I'm trying to make you understand, or help you understand the value to us, right? Why AI in this particular case was driving our decision to utilize this. And as a summary, it absolutely takes maintaining awareness of what's going on. Clearly, you guys are paying attention, whether it's reading and news podcasts, even getting your hands on this stuff. And a lot of it is really product manager friendly, to be honest with you. I mean, you can go in and create your own chatbot, play around with it just to see what it does and all those kinds of things. So it's not hard to go explore it. Obviously, though, you're going to tap your team, not just to have them actually get their hands on and make something real, but also just to brainstorm ideas, because we got some fantastic ideas from our own team. And if you have a customer panel, an advisory group that you can tap as well to say, we're exploring this, what ideas have you come up with? What do you think about when you go play around with ChatGPT or Copilot from Microsoft, what have you? What strikes you as an interesting use case that we might want to go focus on? Those ideas can be harvested from all of those. And obviously you could go look at your competitors too. Not that a whole lot of competitors have shipped anything yet, but you never know. I like the idea that we thought big. I even like the idea that we tried to make the big thing work, because it really got us on a path of knowing what we don't know and understanding what's it going to take to get there. Because ultimately, we're going to have to get there. This stuff's going to have to be part of our platform. No question. It's just a question of when. And so to have gotten our hands on it and really tried to make it work really gave us an appreciation for what it's actually going to take. Okay. And as a product manager who loves to shoot for the moon, you can talk to my engineering colleagues and say, Darren, calm down. let's make this a little bit more achievable, right? And so that's obviously important to be able to do both. And you know what? And it's just like, and don't give up on innovating, right? I think like the idea, this muscle that we're using that's described in this whole story is, for us, I mean, it's a critical muscle, right? You can't rest on your laurels. You have to be out there trying stuff. And, the amount of newness to all of this stuff makes it fun, I think, to go and see what you can build and see what can be done. That is it.
Awesome.
Questions, thoughts, share what you've done.
Just because we have JD, I'd love to, from an engineering perspective, like, is there anything else we got? I know Rachel raised her hand. We have another from Richard. Anything, JD, that you wanted to add? Just because it's really awesome to have you here. So,
sorry, audio. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
And now I can hear myself even better. And I apologize. There's some roof work going on in my house, so if you hear some smashing, that's okay. Yeah, I don't know that I have too much to add without diving into any kind of technical detail that may bore everyone to death. So if you have any questions about that stuff, I'd love to answer them. This is, as Darren said, sort of an ongoing thing for us, and it's an ongoing thing certainly for the industry, and that's very evident once you dive into the technical details. So, one thing I would say that pops out as being a sort of interesting aspect / warning sign is a lot of this technology that we've been engaging with for the last year has itself changed very dramatically over the last year, sort of under our feet. So I think one of the challenges we've had with some of this stuff is putting together something that seemed promising and looked like it was going to work, and then we'd update the libraries or something like that, and then it turned out absolutely everything had changed in the underlying library that we were using, and that continues to happen.
Yeah.
The industry is just going absolutely nuts, sort of building these enabling libraries around this technology. So it's kind of an interesting additional challenge, is to sort of keep up with it when it's in this much flux. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any technical questions to the extent that I can here.
Hey, maybe it's good to start with so Richard, who I don't see Richard on the list anymore, but Richard was asking, curious about testing and how to measure the accuracy of the results.
Gotta go. No, it's a good question. It's not something that we've really looked into. I know that that's a very active area. I am definitely not going to be the person to. I'm not going to be the person to answer that more specifically about what what's out there that can sort of gauge accuracy. I can tell you, having played with this for a while, you start to get a sense of what types of questions you can approach it with, and what types of questions it's not good at. And sometimes there's a lot of subtlety in there. So you find very quickly that its function as essentially a giant compression algorithm sort of lends itself to being very good at answering aggregate type questions. So if you give it a bunch of documents and say, give me the gist of this, that's the kind of thing where it really shines. So our example, or Darren's example of locating the industry, where it's something you can read, you can send it out to their website, you can scrape everything off the website or off the search results for a particular company, and it's the exact kind of task, kind of one of those semi kind of mundane tasks you could give a human to do, where it's just like, read through all this stuff and give me the high level. And it's great at that. It's just it nails that most of the time. It can, if you go to the other side of it, where you're asking it more subjective type decision making type questions. So if you say, here, take all this information and tell me what the right course of action is, that's where you start to run into a lot of kind of weirdness and squishiness with it. So I think a lot of it, how accurate it is, certainly depends on your prompt, I think, as we all know at this point. But the nature of that prompt, and whether you're asking it those types of aggregate this information type questions, or versus like try to suss out like what a proper course of action is, or tell me something more specific, that makes a huge difference, and that's going to make a huge difference in how much you see the thing returning answers that can't possibly be true, and the types of like dreaming scenarios that we've seen.
Yeah, and I'll say too is it really helps to have an authoritative source. In our particular case, industry code being a key when we needed to get right. There are authoritative sources of the industry mappings to companies, and obviously you can license those things. There's a lot of them that are available if you like a trial version of a Dun & Bradstreet type of product, where you can sort of say, I want a company list of, or I want a list of companies. And in our particular case, we're like, I needed to have it, make it global, because we're global, and I wanted to get a authoritative answer to, and which industries are they in? And of course, the picking a code like the NAICS code in our case, I could say, all right, can we recreate these answers? Because I know I'm getting them from an authoritative source. If we can feed them through our system and it spits out the same answer, I know we're doing good. And so obviously in our particular case, it was it was pretty straightforward for us to be able to have an authoritative source to test it against. I think that would be really important to do in all use cases. I see that Rachel has her hand up. Rachel, you want to ask a question? You're on mute. Can she?
Oh, I have to. Yeah, sorry. We have to unmute each time. If you ever mute, and I need to unmute you again. Sorry.
Okay. So you had said think big, start small. And I was noticing that there was a few different ways in which you started small. One is the kind of hackathon work on Fridays approach in terms of resourcing. So start with a small amount of resources as opposed to let's set up a team. Then the other one was, you mentioned token limit, and I saw a question in the chat about that too. And also expense. And my company did a couple of small AI projects, and expense was something that we were trying to keep an eye on, and also our tokens, frankly. And I'm curious to know about things that forced you to stay small, like tokens and expense. I saw like, you're using Bing as like a news service as like an inexpensive way to obtain news content. But like, what are some of the other ways in which you encountered limits, either specifically about tokens and just having to pay for things, or other ways in which you kind of hit a boundary and had to stay small in order to make it a success?
Yeah, JD, why don't you field that? I think you had your hands in that. Oh, unmute.
There you go. JD, you're up.
Sorry, I muted because of all the banging and drilling noises, and then I got stuck. So one thing that jumps to mind, I mean, the token space is like this thing that kind of hangs over everything when you're playing with these things. And you really get the sense, especially if you're trying to shove an enormous amount of data into it, you get the sense that, that one of the ways that this thing is going to progress, that's going to make it that much more useful, is to really expand that space, because we have an enormous amount of data we could potentially put into it and get insight from, and you end up very quickly playing this game where, and the nature of these resource augmented generation type pipelines, is that the game that you're playing is to try to take the data you have and find clever ways to narrow it down to fit in that space and then pass it. So that's where a lot of the engineering comes in, is just on the front end trying to jam things into that token space.
So are you thinking that as they expand like available tokens, and I see that this is something that is a trend where people are expanding that, multiple programs with AI LLMs are expanding. Is that something that's a temporary limit, do you think? Do you think that
I think
as
so.
AI
I mean, we're definitely
develops
seeing
as a
it.
tech,
We're definitely seeing it expand. I think one of the questions is how performant is it once as it does expand. I think there's a tension between those two things, because we're seeing, we've played around with some of the higher token space with open AIs through Azure, and it's nice. Like the more tokens you can put in there, the more it opens up for you. But it also it noticeably takes longer. You can be waiting 10-20 seconds for a response, if you're trying to jam that much stuff in there. So you kind of do this this workaround essentially, which is the exporting of vectors. So you take all your documents up front, you feed them in, and you get essentially a semantic index that you can store on your side and then do what is effectively a search. There's a lot of sort of back and forth about how effective that is compared to just, in a lot of cases, compared to just traditional kind of syntactical search. In a lot of cases, like our regular old search can outperform the semantic search, and that's definitely something we noticed. It is fun to play around with the vector databases and kind of do it that way, but how effective it is compared to traditional search is still kind of an open question, I think.
Have you thought about something like, why don't we do a traditional search, take the results and use
Sure,
and create a summary for the user or something like that? Like,
sure.
have you ever thought about merging?
Yeah, that's that is, it's not something we've had enough real kind of time and resources to like do a thorough kind of test of. It's hard to be kind of scientific about these things, and like I said before, I'm not the expert in how or I guess where the industry is currently with measuring the effectiveness of these things. But it's something that occurs to you right away as you get into this. Like, okay, we can set up this vector search. We can test that it's pulling up these API commands we want to vectorize, like according to search criteria, and then we could theoretically just in that stage of the pipeline just swap out a traditional search and just see for some common searches which performs better. And certainly to the extent that we've done that a little bit, we've not seen like a huge gain in doing the vectorization. But vectorization is not necessarily like the expensive limit that we found. I think really when it comes to sort of bottlenecking on other types of bottlenecks, like you were asking about, with expense, it's just all how many tokens are you putting through it. Our expenses have not, just in playing around with it, and even in potentially opening up like a chat type capability, I wouldn't expect them to be very noticeable. It's really when you start to put it into in any kind of algorithmic sense. So if you really want to start to start to build it into some back end process, it's going to be iterated on a number of times or go through many multiple stages. If you look at that sort of orchestrated agent concept, you could have the potential that you're calling the agent multiple times in order to get the answer to a question. And this is, with a lot of these budding architectures, what you see is not just I'm going to collect some data, I'm going to send it to the AI and ask a question, get a response back. It's more, I'm going to ask a question, then the AI is going to like interpret that question. It's going to go figure out what tool it wants to call first. It's going to get the response to that tool. It's going to interpret the response. It's going to send it somewhere else. And then it's going to bounce around inside for a bunch and make, n number of calls to itself before it returns. When you start to get into that type of architecture and there are obviously ways to govern how many tokens you're using, but that's where I could imagine the expense like really starting to balloon.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's a pretty, I'm surprised nobody brought up I watch our expense pretty carefully for multiple reasons. But it's a relatively small portion of that. It's one of our products that Darren and JD work on. And there are other elements of that solution that he presented that dominate. And it's all the same compute. It's like compute and memory and services that provide those reports. Those are really interesting, very in-depth reports and analyses and things like that. And the actual generation of it, the sort of the AI bit is just one sort of piece of the data that is very, very tiny compared to, at least right now. You can imagine at scale it would go up, but we have other costs that are much higher. So
yeah, we've revectorized some data we were playing with like a number of times over the last year. A fairly large amount of data. We took a bunch of data we found on some Microsoft GitHub sites and a lot of our own internal data, help desk data, everything. We were throwing lots of stuff in there to play around with it, and we never really had a significant problem, at least so far with expense. I think it's really it's like any other technology. We've run into this problem for sure with other technologies in the past where you sort of look at the baseline expenses for making a per call expense and you're like, yeah, it's not that bad, and then you realize as soon as it gets built into some kind of iterative tool that's where the ballooning happens.
Right.
Hey Matt, I know we're going to run out of time here. Rachel did have a question about hacking the hackathons, and maybe I thought you have a lot more experience probably organizing or having your teams organize hackathons. Did you have a comment for her maybe?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things that we do and we've done systemically. I mean, this is actually, even though I've probably given Agile Awesome presentations back in 2000 about some of these kinds of things, innovation and how we do it, like on the path to agility, how did we maintain innovation at the same time? And in general, we build it into our system, like sort of holistically, like sure, we'll have company meetings, annual or semi-annual product week, something like that, where part of that is the multi-day hackathon. We're not the old days of Atlassian 24-hour ship it or whatever they to, but it was like, because we're mostly adults with families and stuff. So we don't need to spend all night. Like it's like can be a couple of days and you get a lot of value with some experts and have some of the, we mix it up, not just engineers, but product and support and all those kinds of things can join. So we have some of those mechanisms. And then even the teams themselves, right? We follow an agile process, lean, agile, all that kind of stuff. And, the idea is to deliver value with the, maximum value reduction of waste. And so along the way, teams might decide, I think Darren and JD were talking about like, it just came to a point where it was a hackathon or it was, sometimes you could do Fridays or something like that. It's mostly even though our total team size today is 40, it was much bigger when this was sort of conceived, probably 4 times that big. And, each of those teams had a lot of self governance on how they execute, and that's very high alignment between product and engineering on what the right thing to do at the right time. So they can pick these different kinds of mechanisms on, how and when to do these kinds of things. And then certain people just like doing it on their own time. And so the other element that we add from an engineering learning perspective is, and we talked about this after we had some pretty big reductions in forces, we said, hey, we want to make sure that people still have time to learn and grow. And so we said, hey, 20% time, figure out how that works. We'll pay for courses, we'll pay for, time for you to come together. But it's really sort of, we want to sponsor. I want to sponsor it as the VP of engineering, and then let the in partnership with senior product leadership, and then let the teams and the individuals figure out how to make it work for them.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think sometimes it's fun. I think the product weeks are, don't put a limit around the ideas, and a lot of times at the end of the product week, somebody's built a game or somebody's built, it's like it's complete throwaway, but it was just like so much fun, and they got a chance to maybe use a technology that would never be used in that context at our company, but they learned enough to say, hey, you know where that could be useful? We could use it here in our product. And so those ideas can germinate. But if sort of creatives or live in your product management team, having them sort of say, okay, tell you what, pick any idea, but pick it from like these technologies, or pick it from, like these kinds of use cases, that might yield a more tangible example of something you could actually ship, right? Or we at least weave into your roadmap.
And Darren, you started off this conversation by talking about how, from a product, you don't need to be a software engineer, for lack of a better term. A lot of these things, so many of these things, like you were talking there, and just like you can just do it on your own, right?
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
don't need engineers. Like you might not be able to productize it or build it for scale. Please don't. But like you can do the proof of concepts really easily, and fast feedback and turnaround. We're talking about Azure, but there's like, what's the thing on AWS? They have that whole playground over there where you can just like build and prototype things. And it's like, you don't need to be a software engineer to do this stuff. It's amazing the tools that my 9-year-old has access to build applications and prototype, right? So if you have the experience and the wisdom of knowing what the customer problem is, and you're falling in love with the problem, it's like really fun to explore the problem space. So
yeah, you just have to make sure you enter with some humility, and realize that as much as it looks like it's ready to ship, when you get done with it, don't tell your engineering colleagues that. You'll embarrass yourself. Well, cool. This is fun. I hope you guys found that useful. It was a good conversation.
Any other questions before we close it out? All right. Well, I guess Vishal, did you want to close this out, or I'm happy to do it?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you. Thanks, Darren, and thanks, JD, for providing so much awesome real world examples. I loved the failure, the learning opportunity. Back many years ago, we were starting the DevOps SIG. A very curmudgeon-y person said, "I don't ever want to hear about successes. I want to hear about your failures." Ned Horvath might have been in that meeting. Anyway, it was like the secret of success of, I think, SIGs is talking about, hey, we learned this and then we changed, and then people like success too. So it's great to see kind of where we are, and how much more there is to do. It's just a fascinating space, and just awesome to show a little bit of the insight and the magic that you guys built. So thanks so much. And thanks to our community showing up and with such great questions and interest and enthusiasm, and dealing with our Byzantine processes for unmuting, thanks to the Zoom bombers. And we do have an Agile Austin Slack community. Just reach out to Vishal or I if you'd like to join. Darren is in there. You don't need to be in Austin. Neither Darren's in there. I'm in there. So maybe Richard, did you say you were in San Antonio? I can't remember. Number of folks, all over the country. So it's really great to have the conversation continue. And we'll be back in a month with John Hines, who can talk about usability in AI. And if you ask him that question about how do you know that you're getting consistent results, he will chew your ear off about Bayesian networks for many, 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 many minutes. So maybe that's another conversation for him to talk about. He's a huge fan of Bayesian analysis. So and a long time Agile Awesome contributor. So we'll see y'all in a month. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Cool.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm going to